Well, hello everyone. I'm really delighted to welcome you all to TNC's latest Down the Wire podcast. And today's topic is, as always, an absolute cracker: enterprise network design for cloud enablement. I'm John Waterhouse, CEO of TNC. I'll be your host for the next 20 minutes. As I'm sure everyone joining knows, TNC is the UK's largest independent network and telecoms strategy and sourcing consultancy. We support over 290 major UK multinational organisations and help them get the very best results from their network and telecoms solutions. So joining us today to share his expertise, as always, is our CTO, Craig Northveth. Craig, would you like to say hello to our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, hi John, hi viewers and listeners. Great to be back again. I'm looking forward to this topic today.
Fantastic. We're going to make you sing for your supper today, Craig. So not only is it a great topic, I know it's one that's very close to your heart as well. So what we're particularly going to focus on today is what are the key steps our viewers and listeners, and indeed their organizations, need to take to ensure their network is effectively and optimally designed to enable their cloud application strategy. So we're going to dive straight in with a good scene setter, Craig. So could you take us through what are the main challenges facing architects today as they're looking out into their network and into their network strategy, and particularly as they've got an eye on cloud migration and cloud enablement?
Yeah, I'll certainly try. John. I think the role of architect, whether it's enterprise architect or more specifically network architect, has become quite difficult in recent times. There's been a hell of a lot of change in terms of the architectural landscape, whether that's applications moving out into cloud services, whether it's technology enhancements like SD-WAN and SASE, whether it's hybrid working policies, people working from different locations. Pretty much all of the consistents around architecture have changed. Therefore, you've got to take a slightly different approach to understanding how to optimize the architecture environment. So I think, if we specifically focus in on a couple of the challenges, I guess if we look at, majority of traditional networks out there are still, I guess, what we would probably class as a sort of legacy, sort of MPLS closed type network environments. Now, obviously, the nature of that type of environment means it's quite difficult to exit that network to be able to consume applications that may be sitting out on the internet, maybe in a kind of private cloud or public cloud type service. You tend to need to find an exit point from that network, and the more and more you disperse applications and the more you disperse people, entry and exit into a network is becoming a big challenge, and something that needs to be tackled in terms of future architectural design. I think the other thing, and when we kind of talk about legacy networks, and we've talked in previous podcasts around moving more out into SD-WAN and SASE type networks, that doesn't always address the challenge either. The design of SD-WAN, there's key considerations around, from an architectural perspective, how do you optimally design SD-WAN to deliver the best performance for cloud networks, or cloud environment, should I say. So again, it's not a matter of just taking the legacy type of logical design you would have in a network and applying that to SD-WAN. There's other challenges that you've got to think about in terms of accessing hyperscaler backbones, local breakout connectivity, the type of access that you've potentially got, security. There's lots and lots of things that you've got to put in the mix into now to try and get an answer to what is the optimum architecture. And I think the kind of final point, another challenge, which is obviously quite a recent challenge, is the influx of remote working as well. People are being moved off of the network. They're sat on sort of private home networks now. How do you then provide the performance and optimum security and a direct access into either on-prem applications, again, public cloud-hosted applications, or internet-based applications? Lots and lots of challenges for enterprise and network architects alike to try and resolve.
It makes me wonder if they've even got time to be listening to this podcast, although it should, of course, be essential listening.
I mean, I think the positive side of this obviously elevates their role a little bit in terms of looking at how this, from a business perspective, how do we optimize the performance and the end user experience? How do we get that network architecture correct? The network is, and we've talked about this in the past, it's the foundation of it's the glue effectively between the people and the services and the applications, or users and applications. So it's really, really imperative that, yeah, the focus in terms of how you design the network to be as optimal as possible is really, really given, kind of a priority.
Yeah, and that really sort of leads on to the next question I wanted to ask you. So we get these challenges, and I guess I know the motivation behind this podcast and the white paper you've written on this recently is surprisingly frequently we engage with organizations, we talk with organizations who are on a cloud migration strategy. They're pushing workloads increasingly into the cloud, and they haven't really developed the network or the network strategy to underpin that successfully. What are the consequences of that? And I guess as a sort of sub question, could we not just iterate as we go? As things, move fast and break things, right? So start throwing some applications up into the cloud, see what happens to the network, and tweak as we go. Can we not do that?
I think that the biggest challenge with that approach is that networks are not traditionally agile.
Mm,
There's fixed components to many networks, and if you start at a very basic level, connectivity is not known for being very agile. You can get some flexibility in connectivity, but not a lot of organizations opt to put in, huge barriers just in case that they need to increase the bandwidth, because there's a cost implication of that. So it's not the agile mindset, if you like, or methodology that we see in I guess the cloud space is not quite there yet within the network space. So you've got to plan strategically ahead around, well, yeah, if we're gonna change our application landscape, if we're gonna move all of our local applications or central or regional applications, we're going to put them in Azure or AWS. That's obviously changing the dynamic of the traffic profile. By changing the dynamic of the traffic profile means you need to think about network capacity. You potentially need to think about additional resilience. You need to think about performance. You need to think about best path in terms of being able to route that traffic directly to consume that application, whichever cloud platform it's sat in. So the iterative approach, it works to a certain extent where you've got some flexibility. But I think you've got to back to the point of the network's foundational service, and it's really core to building out a successful cloud strategy. You've got to think about planning that as part of the cloud migration aspect as well.
And I guess, obviously from conversations we've had on previous podcasts and other white papers, that transformation timeline, I know we'll get onto this in more detail later on, but that transformational timeline, that's pretty long, right? To transform the network to provide a true platform for cloud enablement, that doesn't take days or weeks, that takes months and years.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, again, it's back to the nature of the network, really. So there's some things that can be done, and increasingly we see more and more capability in software, if you like. So we see more and more SD type services, whether it's at the edge of the infrastructure, whether it's within the cloud through SASE. We're starting to see, steps into that world where we're seeing more agile type network consumption capabilities. But for the majority of customers, they're not quite there yet. So strategically, that's where they should be going, and we'll talk about what it looks like in a second. But yeah, for a lot of organisations, it's a big task to say, actually, yeah, if we want to cloudify our application estate, we're going to move all of our localized applications. We're going to get rid of our data centers. We're going to centralize or put everything in a distributed cloud infrastructure. You've got to take a lot of consideration around, well, what network do we need to be able to enable that? How do we ensure that, whether it's a remote machine, whether it's a user in an office location, whether it's somebody that's sat working from home, how do we ensure that we're getting the right type of network experience and user experience? How do we ensure it's secure? How do we ensure it's resilient? How do we ensure it's got the capacity and flexibility? How do we ensure it's directly connected where possible to the cloud services? Optimizing that connection, so not backhauling traffic through a single point or having any bottlenecks or constraints within the network. All of these moving parts need to be then sort of factored into what's the future network architecture look like.
So it's not a tweak. it's a pretty fundamental, foundational.
Yeah.
Are we going to say the T word, transformation?
I think it certainly needs to be strategic consideration needs to be taken to ensure that you're going to, in line with your cloud transformation, if you like, you've got to take the network along the journey. I think what we've seen some organizations do it the other way around. So they've moved some core production services, potentially O365, things like that, Exchange, and moved it up into the cloud, SharePoint, moved it up into the cloud, and then they've considered the network afterwards. What we've seen with them users and them organizations is almost immediately, actually, performance issues from an end user point of view, because the way they're consuming them services completely changes. So if you're not looking at your bandwidths, if you're not looking at optimized access to O365, if you're not looking at trying to remove any kind of bottleneck routing, you're going to run into challenges. So you've got to take them considerations and embed them into the cloud transformation projects to ensure that you provide an enabling infrastructure from day one rather than trying to address it at a later stage. I think the other problem, again, just carrying on from that, first impressions are really important with some of these things.
Yeah.
So if you think about, an organization may decide to move from on-prem Exchange to O365 Exchange, or SharePoint maybe is a better example. If that user's experience of consuming that once it's moved up into the cloud is poor, the perception is that actually that project's failed.
Yeah.
And the service that they're consuming from the cloud is not a good one. Where in reality, it's probably nothing to do. Well, it's almost certainly nothing to do with the service in the cloud. It's the path to effectively get there that's not being taken into consideration.
And obviously, once that bad perception is formed in the mind of users, it's hard to break that.
Yes.
Yeah. And as you say, the cloudification project is sort of forever tainted almost with the wasn't great.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess what we're saying is this is a big deal. This is critical to the success of that wider transformation strategy, and we can't just sort of run alongside that cloudification program, tweaking as we go. So what it sounds like is that organizations need a roadmap and they need to be ahead of the curve. So they need to have the network designed and deployed and tested and in production before those cloud services start to hit it, so that they can deliver the experience. So you talked about what good looks like. Now sounds like the perfect time in our podcast to talk about, well, what does good look like for that network? What are the things that it needs to do if it's going to meet the requirements of that transformation strategy?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right in terms of the roadmap aspect of it. So at a bare minimum, there needs to be some assessment of the capability and viability of the network to be able to support cloud services, particularly as you go through that transformation. So whether that's a single assessment or whether it's multiple assessments throughout the process, that's a key aspect of this. And there's tools out there, the cloud vendors, there's third parties, there's things that you can do just based on desk-based exercises to assess that capability of the network and identify where the potential risks are and what the impacts of them risks would be. So that's kind of the first part of that roadmap. But in terms of then developing that strategy out, what does good look like? I think there's probably three key areas. So one is the network itself. So at a very basic fundamental level, looking at connectivity. That's the bit that's almost the hardest to change. So ensuring that if you are going to do some changes from that connectivity level, that you're buying the right type of connectivity. This has again increasingly got quite more complex because of things like SD-WAN. So we're seeing the trend of more and more people moving to SD-WAN internet-based environments, which is great. That's one step in the right direction to give that direct access to internet-based and cloud-based applications. But there's also considerations to take around the type of internet that you buy, the peering of that internet to the cloud service providers, the quality of that internet, because if it's poor quality, the network's only as good as its weakest link. So you can put as much SD-WAN, as much traffic engineering, as much potential optimization on top of it. If you've got a really rubbish broadband connection that's flapping all the time and it's just really, really poor, the network's going to be poor. There's no getting around it. You can try and engineer as much as you want around it. So the key thing, at a very basic fundamental level, is getting the right connectivity. Trying to get connectivity where you've got some flexibility in it, so you can turn it up and turn it down. Because again, supporting that cloud transformation, there may be a requirement at the early stages to migrate lots of data. But then, as we see in more and more hybrid and flexible working environments, you're not always going to need a gigabit of bandwidth. You might only need 100 megs some days, and being able to turn it up and turn it down, but more dynamically. I think the other key thing as well in looking at the future connectivity strategy is, and this is really important, around peering with the cloud providers. So as part of the overall architecture, there's a consideration around the global backbone, if you want, and this is specifically probably for more global organizations than sort of UK ones, but do you look to create your own global backbone, or if you're moving more and more services into Microsoft or Azure, or AWS, do you potentially look to consume their global backbones and then hop onto their backbone at a regional POP or a local POP potentially? So again, some considerations around how to best optimize that traffic for the applications that you're consuming. But the one key factor is looking at the cloud service provider peering from the ISP that you're effectively sourcing services from. So if you end up sourcing really cheap tier 3 broadband services, the likelihood is you're going to have to hop through a number of different service providers to get to the Microsoft backbone or the Amazon backbone or the Google backbone. Therefore, it's not an optimized traffic path. And then you might be saving some money, but the end user performance is going to be pretty poor. So it's almost looking at what's the right level to try and pitch that sourcing at to ensure that you're getting a good business grade service that's got pretty decent peer into the hyperscaler backbones, and then effectively consume their high speed, high available backbone capability between all of their POPs. So connectivity is probably the key thing here, and going down to a granular level, something that you didn't necessarily have to worry too much about with MPLS in the past. I think the next step then is around looking at a kind of a cloud access optimization strategy. So what is the best way to access the cloud and the cloud resources? So is that via virtual connection through SD-WAN? Is it through a fixed private connection like Express Route or Direct Connect, for instance? Do you do it through your ISP or your telco? Is there some sort of cloud gateway capability? Is that access regionally? Is it access centrally? A lot of this again depends on how the cloud tenant is designed. It's a single tenant, if it's a global distributed tenant, if there's any CDN capabilities. So I think the key takeaway is a lot of considerations. Back to my original point, it's not such an easy job these days to be a network architect.
Pay rises all around for the architects listening. Yeah, we support it.
Yeah.
and I guess what's interesting, I mean, you made the point that a lot of these are new considerations. You think back to the days of quite old school MPLS style networks. You still had to think. It wasn't that there was no architecture required at that point. There were still a lot of things to think about.
Yeah.
It seems that you still got all those things to think about, but now you've got all these other things to think about as well. A lot of things that back in the day you didn't have to think about have been laid on top of almost like the original day job. And that's a lot of additional complication, presumably therefore a lot of additional time in when procuring, deploying these services. That's this isn't zero time, right? All these additional considerations.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're starting to see. So there's been there's a bit of a change in boundaries, I think, between what organizations used to get as a service from the telcos and the ISPs versus what they did internally. The boundaries actually dropping down a little bit now. So there's more to be done internally than what's being done by the ISPs, because the network's becoming more dynamic in terms of the choice and the availability of solutions and different approaches and topologies. You've got to start making some of them decisions internally, whereas before it's fairly black box. It was what bandwidth do you want and how many CPU do you require, and kind of where's your site will evolve a kind of inter-routing and the global backbone and everything else. And your cloud access is different to that now. And it obviously gets more complex if you're in a multi-cloud environment, and again, more and more different locations, people working from home, people working in offices. You start putting, I guess increasingly we're starting to see IoT coming into the mix as well. So OT infrastructures have been IP enabled. That's another component that you've got to think about. And then, the big elephant in the room, I guess, is where does security sit in all this as well now? So the network architect and the security architect in the past, they were fairly well-defined separate roles. I think increasingly security best sits within the network.
Yeah.
Because again, it's a foundational platform which all the traffic is going through. It's the best inspection points. Because there's no real central breakout anymore in future architecture. You've got to be inspecting everywhere. So security is also then being embedded into that kind of remit of the network architect, because you're building secure networks rather than just building networks these days. So lots of considerations. I think back to the question in terms of what good looks like. Obviously, flexible dynamic bandwidth is key if it's affordable. Being able to turn it up, turn it down, and we're starting to see some products come into the market where that's more available than what it has been in the past. So kind of burstable type solutions. Good peered network access, so trying to find something that's directly peered, a service provider that's directly peered into the hyperscalers. That allows you to consume the key productivity services like M365 and things like that directly off of their backbone rather than having to create your own. And then looking at obviously embedding security in across the network at all these various ingress and egress points, so you've got a single orchestrated platform for network and security. That's the kind of summary of, I think, what good looks like and what you should be striving to achieve from a strategic output.
That's really, really interesting. And already just going through that list and thinking about the breadth and the depth and the and the complication of it, you can see why you can't just hope the current network will do, and or will we'll tweak and iterate it as we go. There's a lot of fairly fundamental change in there. So conscious we haven't got long left. What are the key steps our viewers and listeners should be taking? If someone's listening to this and thinking, yeah, that's the journey we're on, or that's the journey we're going to be on. And the truth is, that's the journey almost everyone is going to be on in terms of what's happening with the applications. What are the main 2, 3, 4 things they need to do? And I'm presuming the number one is get on with it, because what we're seeing, I guess, across the pieces, this takes longer than people expect because of the complexity. But apart from get on with it, what should they be getting on with?
Yeah, so I think the first step in this is gaining that understanding. So understanding as at an organisation level, and again, kind of keeping the focus on the kind of architecture team, if you like, enterprise architects, network architects, understand what's happening within the application space. So I think we do sometimes see quite a bit of a disconnect between the app development teams and transformation teams that are working and trying to get some of these legacy apps up into the cloud with the architecture and operational teams, infrastructure operational teams. I think the first step is really to get an understanding of what is that roadmap from an application landscape perspective and understanding what the impact could be. So then once we understand that, then assessing what you've currently got. So, baseline the current environment, assess the capability to be able to execute the cloud strategy, or cloud transformation approach, look at where the gaps are in terms of, you're saying you want to do this, but the network will only do this. This will be the potential performance issue or capacity issue or user issue. And then I think what is key is actually raising the profile.
Yeah.
So it's one of the things that we talk about a lot is that, we've touched on here that the network is foundational to success for this. A lot of organizations don't see that, I don't think. So there's a little bit of marketing work to be done, I think, in terms of saying, well, actually, we understand that you're trying to achieve this at the business level. This is going to deliver a lot of new benefit in terms of the applications being able to consume them from wherever, but it's going to fail, or it's not going to be as successful as you want it to be if you don't address these sort of key challenges that we've identified at a network level. So raising the profile, getting a seat on the table in terms of the bigger transformation piece, and then looking at how you then effectively develop a future strategic architecture to support the wider transformation piece.
And I presume there's a budget question buried in all of that, isn't there? That, I know from a lot of conversations I've had, I'm sure you've had the same. Someone somewhere is looking at the brilliant commercial benefits that this brings, or retiring our data centers or elevating all of our services, or whatever it is going to. There's generally a commercial benefit being targeted, whether that's cost savings or business benefits.
Yep.
Either way, or both, someone somewhere's got their eye on a commercial prize. But we often find that the network hasn't really been considered in there, and there hasn't necessarily been money carved out to transform the network. And in the scheme of the whole program, is probably relatively small numbers. But if you haven't got the money to invest in the network,
I think if we, again, looking on the experience on this, doing this proactively is cheaper than doing it reactively.
Yeah.
Because once you're in a situation where you've got to do it, you've not got much choice, and you end up tactically fixing things.
Yeah.
Whereas if you do something strategically and it's part of the bigger program, we know there's opportunity to take some cost out of legacy networks, whilst improving the flexibility, the agility, ensuring that you've got the cloud, direct cloud access, ensuring that you've got security embedded in. We know that's feasible if you do it proactively and strategically. But yeah, what we find is people that don't do this, as soon as they've migrated some services, think, oh crap, we've got to get some new bandwidth.
Yeah.
We're not going to do this, and they'll just pay whatever they need to pay to get it done.
Yeah.
And then they're facing into a kind of after the event type of strategy, which is not obviously best practice.
And presumably at that point, they're potentially in bed with the wrong suppliers. They're not gaining the wider strategic benefits of doing this properly. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Craig, fascinating as always. I'm sorry to say we've run out of time. I always feel with some of these topics, and this one particularly, we could have twice as long. Our viewers and listeners are just going to have to read your white paper. I dare say we've got a breakfast coming up about this very topic, and they're welcome to come along to that. Yeah, but for now, we're going to have to leave it there. So, Craig, thank you as always. Fascinating to hear your thinking on this. And thank you everyone for listening. And please do let us know any questions you may have about this or any other network and telecoms topic. You can get in touch with us through our website, networkcollective.co.uk, or any of the usual social channels. And we look forward to talking with you again soon.